This is a story about basic underwater demolition SEAL training and deals with the final 3 weeks spent at San Clemente Island. The title of the story, Blowing Things Up. Our work with explosives started shortly after Hell Week, but it wasn't until we went to San Clemente Island that we received real hands-on experience with large shots. For me, the most difficult period of BUDS training had to be the 3 final weeks of training spent at San Clemente Island. And of those 3 weeks, the single most difficult day was one spent loading obstacles. The obstacles I refer to are similar to the ones that awaited World War II Allied forces coming ashore during the D-Day invasion at Normandy. For the men of the teams, called naval combat demolition units, their most important job would be destroying those obstacles before the commencement of D-Day landings. There are numerous and varying types of obstacles, but the one I will be referring to is called the German or Japanese Scully. This is a 3-foot square block of concrete that stands roughly 3 feet high. Embedded in the concrete are 2 spikes made from railroad track or thick steel rods that stick another 3 feet above its top. The spikes face seaward toward oncoming boats. Then, when a landing craft carrying troops approaches the beach, it becomes impaled on the spikes. The men in the boat become easy targets or drown. Destroying an obstacle isn't as simple as swimming in, attaching explosives, pulling the fuse, and returning to the waiting pickup boat for recovery. It is, in fact, much more complicated than that. Multiple obstacles require that you run a trunk line between each so that they can all be blown at one time. This prevents individual shots from going off, killing any swimmers still in the area. Also, to properly destroy an underwater obstacle of this type, you must place explosives on its seaward side. The explosives must then be secured as tightly to the obstacle as possible. This is the most important aspect of blowing something up. Attaching explosives to an obstacle is accomplished by using rope that comes in the haversack or satchel containing the explosives. If done properly, the obstacle will either be completely destroyed or blown up onto the beach where it will no longer present a hazard to incoming boats. Properly loading obstacles requires close teamwork that is very labor intensive. Soon after we arrived at San Clemente, our entire class was ordered to muster at a lagoon located several hundred yards from the tents we called home. It was early afternoon, and our first problem would be that of loading obstacles. The water in the lagoon was calm, but extremely cold. The obstacles were placed in about 20 feet of water, much deeper than they would be placed in a real combat situation. At this depth, the distance between the boat's bottom and the impelling spikes of the obstacle would have been far too great to cause any concern. The obstacles had been placed at this depth for one reason: to make it more difficult for the trainee. Paired up, entered the water, and started to work. My swim partner was Jim Foley, a strong swimmer, hard worker, and solid performer. We worked well together, and after several dives each, called the instructor to check our work. The instructor pulled the haversack from the obstacle and returned to the surface, screaming at us for taking too long to do a second-rate job. He then said that our wetsuit tops apparently made us too buoyant, and because we had failed so miserably during our first attempt at loading the obstacles, we were ordered to remove our wetsuit tops. Again and again we dove into the freezing water. 1 hour quickly into 2, and then 3. Hypothermia was now starting to make it more and more difficult to perform. Both Jim and I were shaking uncontrollably, and the time we were able to stay underwater grew shorter with each dive. Holding our breath for any length of time grew to be almost insurmountable. We continued for another 2 hours, but at this point, neither Jim nor I could think, let alone work underwater. We were played out, but we continued to dive and do the best we could. Then, after 5 hours, the instructors ordered us out of the water. According to them, we had failed miserably and would have to repeat this problem the following day. At this point, we were just happy to leave the freezing water and put on some warm clothes. Then, that evening, When we attempted and failed the night problem, we found ourselves with 2 problems completed and 2 problems to be repeated. Both would have to be made up, and we had only finished our first full day on the island, and so it would go for the next 3 weeks. As far as loading obstacles, we would come back the next day to successfully resolve the previous day problems. On this day, we would not only set the explosives, we would destroy the obstacles as well. Apparently, all of the instructors' abuse and rejection had paid off. Each of the obstacles was successfully destroyed or blown up onto the beach and out of harm's way. The second incident occurred one night during our second week at San Clemente. A detachment of Navy Seabees had come to the island to conduct training exercises. They had established their base camp at the top of a cliff, about a half mile from our compound, high above the ocean. We could see them, but we had no interface with them and really didn't know or care what they were doing or why they were there. We had just completed our afternoon problem, finished dinner, and were now waiting for the instructors to brief us on the forthcoming night problem. Though we didn't know it at the time, this would prove to be one of the only fun problems we would undertake during our 3 weeks on the island. When called together for the first nightly briefing, we were told that our problem that night involved the Seabees. We were to load several hundred pounds of explosives on the side of the cliff, below where the Seabees were camped. We would then set a time fuse, escape to our boats at the base of the cliff, and paddle out into the bay to watch the fireworks. If we could pull this off without being spotted, it would prove that we were ready to graduate to the teams. Or at least, this is how we trainees perceived it. At 0200 hours, or 2 a.m., we were given the go-ahead and entered the water. It took less than an hour to secure the area, set the explosives, and return to the waiting boats. The instructor and trainee who stayed behind to light the fuse were the last to return. In addition, 2 instructors stayed at the top of the cliff, away from the explosives and out of sight of the Seabee sentries. They were there to stop anyone from accidentally wandering near or stumbling onto the explosives and being killed. We paddled our boats to a safe distance offshore and waited. What would then happen will forever remain a picture in my mind. There was a tremendous flash of light that turned night into day. Then followed an ear-deafening, thunderous explosion and the accompanying concussion. The sight was something to behold, and as we sat there motionless, transfixed on all that we were seeing, the Seabees were reacting differently. Tents were being knocked to the ground. Men were running in circles. Others were bumping into each other, and some were falling down. Each man totally disoriented, and all the while it was as though this were happening in slow motion. There was one certainty. These men had been given a new outlook on life, and I would bet they would not soon forget this night. It would take a while for the grip of lost darkness to once again take hold. Then, when it did, we paddled our boats back to the compound, and though the instructors wouldn't admit it, Class 28 had pulled it off and passed a critical test. We would soon be ready for our place in the teams. If you enjoyed this story and would like to purchase a copy of my book, go to www.udt-seal-stories.com and I will send you a signed copy. If you prefer the Kindle version, go to amazon.com, books, and type in Nick Nicholson. Thank you.